Welcome back to another episode of Unreleased or Unobtainable. Within these videos, I explore games that were completed to some sort of degree but never officially released, or alternatively, games that were, but are tremendously expensive because they're so rare. In both cases, I am thankful for emulation. As far as the timeline of gaming is concerned and online anticipation for a ROM to leak goes, I don't think anything trumps the sequel to Marble Madness. Discussed and sought after for decades, it appears to have been one of the most sought after ROMs ever. If you're not aware of Marble Madness, the premise of the game is to navigate a marble through a surreal environment inspired by MC Escher's artworks, avoiding as many hazards as possible. The original Marble Madness was a success in the arcades when it was released in 1984, but the real reason it's so fondly remembered is because it received ports to over 20 consoles, handhelds, and personal computers combined. Many people played it. Because of that, its unique gameplay premise is fondly remembered by many. Typical of this corner of the retro gaming scene, there is quite a bit of story and online drama that led to the eventual leak of the ROM, but it all began in 1991. The designer of the original game, Mark Cerny, who's known for more modern achievements like being the architect of the PS5, PS4 and PS Vita, wasn't involved in the sequel. Instead, the original programmer, Bob Flanagan, teamed up with Mike Halley to finally bring another Marble Madness to fruition. Atari didn't make the decision until 7 years after the original release to develop a sequel, and it was to be called Marble Madness 2. The arcade machines was to support 3 players, up from 2, include 17 levels as opposed to the original 6, introduce power-ups, and even a pinball-style minigame. A goal of development was to make the sequel accessible to a younger demographic, so the character Marble Man was introduced. A cartoony hero-type character, which is an interesting choice to base off an indifferent marble, would humanize and fly across the screen when the new abilities were activated. But the biggest change was the removal of the trackball. Marble Man was to instead be controlled by a standard joystick. Trackball controls were a huge part of what made Marble Madness the game it was, so the decision seems a bit mad in hindsight. It was argued in internal Atari documents that the joystick would be easier for beginners since they were aiming for a younger audience. The lack of momentum you receive from playing with a joystick instead would be replaced with a turbo button, matching what a lot of players would be familiar with on home ports. As well as internal documents being available online, we can also access the logs of an internal messaging system called Vaxmail. This is an interesting read in itself, and I would recommend checking out a link in the description. But staying on topic, there are references to Marble Man's development over a several month period in 1991. For instance, 6-packs were offered as rewards to those who tested the game in-house and found bugs like resets and hang-ups. Unfortunately, on-site testing of the prototype cabinets didn't go well. Even to kids, Marble Man was an unlikable character. So, he was scrapped, and the game was renamed to just be Marble Madness 2. This is the footage you've been seeing in the video so far. Sadly though, for the development team, location tests still went poorly. There is evidence that production was initially approved for 750 units, followed by another 3,000, but the order was cancelled just days later. Hot games of the time like Street Fighter 2 were blamed for the disinterest. So, Marble Madness 2 was cancelled in favour of focusing on Guardians of the Hood instead, which was Atari's answer to games like Street Fighter. Marble Madness 2 left the early 90s as only a handful of prototype machines. There was a rumour circulating online for years that the remaining arcade boards were scrapped for tax purposes in 1996, but this has been dismissed as an urban legend by Cerny. But with all that said and done, how well does Marble Madness 2 play? I liked how the game displays on-screen help as you progress. It's necessary since the gameplay is very different to the original. Sure, the basic premise is the same. You control a marble through an interesting looking environment, avoiding hazards and trying to make it to the end goal before time runs out. But straight away, we need to consider that there is now an action button. Not only will this give you a boost, including jumping off ramps, but also snaps you out of a stun, which you'll be doing quite a bit, believe me. Additionally, the sequel introduces breakable walls, collectible flagpoles for scoring points, surfaces that will stun you, as well as lights that lead the way, but will also stun you if you roll through them while illuminated. There are even power-ups that enable aspects like better traction, invincibility, and even invisibility. Make it far enough through the game, and there are pinball bonus rounds to score a bunch more points. These were pretty cool, I'll give the game that, but overall, Marble Madness 2 just isn't that fun of a game. It's not totally awful, but it doesn't control like the original. And this isn't just because of the lacking trackball either. I also played the original during the production of this video without one, and it felt way more refined. On that note, I wish I owned a trackball. If you have a recommendation for one that can easily be interfaced with MAME through Windows or RetroPie, please let me know. Regardless, the Marble simply isn't as responsive as the original. It seems to actively fight against the direction you want to go. And I do realise the game wasn't finished, so this may not seem like a fair criticism, but evidently the developers were close. Just look at it, everything like the graphics and sound is quite polished. Additionally, how well you do in a level directly translates into how much time you get for the next. But of course, this game has been designed for a machine that relies on players feeding it as many coins as possible. I felt like the time given wasn't really that fair unless you cough up and pay. This won't be an issue for us at least, I just had to keep spamming the number 5 key instead. The enemy attacks are also a bit over the top. It's probably somewhat to do with using a joystick instead of a trackball. It's more about avoidance than navigating the level itself. You'll be pressing that action button a lot to unstun yourself, that's for sure. Frankly, Marble Madness 2 is nowhere near as good as the groundbreaking original. We can be certain that Atari canned it for good reasons. You might be wondering how we can access and play the ROM today, and as per usual, it's an interesting, if winding story. In an interview with Cerny, he hypothesized that 10 to 12 boards could exist. Furthermore, rumours had been flying around the internet for years that the ROM had indeed been dumped and held in a private MAME development server for posterity reasons. However, it was in the early 2000s when solid information about the prototype was first published online. On a website called Safe Stuff, which is still accessible today, Scott Evans would blog about his extensive prototype arcade collection. There is a particularly interesting story detailed there on how he built a Marble Man cabinet. It started with him coming across a Marble Man arcade board in 1997 that was missing all its ICs and the soundboard. It details his journey to locate all the missing components, including copying the ROMs from a then unnamed ex-Atari employee. This was later revealed to be Bob Flanagan himself, as told by Bob Flanagan on the Arcade Museum forums years later. He also had luck purchasing parts from others in the arcade prototype collecting scene, including someone with an entire machine, the identity of which has never been disclosed. Finally, the completed machine debuted at the California Extreme Gaming Expo in 2000 and could be played by the public. It has since been exhibited several times over the years, meaning forum goers had opinions on the quality of the game long before the ROM was leaked. For everyone else, gameplay footage had existed online since at least 2007. Additionally, by 2003, Evans had sourced enough parts to build a second Marble Man arcade machine, but this time with trackballs, meaning it would be quite an early build. Back to the ROM, however. Now, I don't have any proof of this next part of the story. All my research is solely from existing forums like Atari Age, which could mean bad or good things. If you've watched any of my other videos in the series, you'll know exactly what I mean. In the early 2000s, there was an arcade news group who were negotiating with an arcade board owner to release the ROM. We can't assume this is Scott Evans, as we know there was at least one other Marble Man owner out there, but there are some conflicting accounts on how much money this individual wanted. One forum poster claimed it was $5,000. The community started to gather the funds, but the board owner backed out and claimed he wasn't serious. If you think $5,000 is too much, the other account of the story claimed he wanted $50,000 instead. Again, this is hearsay, but supposedly the community raised nearly 30 grand before the individual upped the price to something even more ridiculous, which kiboshed the entire thing. True or not, it would be another decade until whispers of a ROM release would start circulating again. In the December of 2021, the website VG Maps were anonymously sent high-resolution screenshots of each level's map. This was big news because previously there was only camera footage of the gameplay at expos. This means someone had the ROM and was capturing the images in something like MAME. Later on, in the VG Maps forum, the website's administrator mentioned that their source claimed that for 18 years, they've had a special build of MAME that would run it. They forgot they had it, and when they remembered, they were surprised no one else had leaked it yet. By late December, a YouTube channel called Marble Man started releasing gameplay footage of Marble Madness 2 in emulation. As far as I can tell, this was a first. Several other channels followed suit, and by May 2022, the ROM was released to the public via the Internet Archive. And who can we thank for this? Well, their name is Dank2079. So thanks, Dank2079. You have potentially saved certain online communities upwards of $50,000. No one really knows for sure who dumped it, but Dank2079 hasn't uploaded anything else to the Internet Archive, but the modified dates on the files are from the May of 2000. This ROM has been floating out there for a long time, just not publicly. David Haywood, who was a developer for MAME, soon got the game playing, and a later release of MAME supported it outright. That's how I captured the footage for this video, and along with MAME, there are websites out there that allow you to play directly in the browser. No one really knows how many Marble Man or Marble Madness 2 boards exist, but it's great that a ROM for Marble Madness 2 was finally released without drama and without being held financially captive by unscrupulous collectors. On that note, hopefully, one day we'll see a ROM release for the original Marble Man.